Welcome, everybody, to the Beards and Bible podcast. My name is Josh. I'm joined, as always, by good friend Gabriel Joel Rutledge. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm in a little bit different of a setting tonight. Let's good to mix things up.
Yeah. Very, very Jordan Peterson-esque you got going on there. You're in your living room.
How do you expect that we're going to change the world unless you can make your own dang bed?
You're in your. I just heard your kids giggling in the background.
This is Aiden. Aiden is standing on the stairs watching me as I'm recording my podcast and eating his cheese stick.
I feel like you could charge money for people to sit on the stairs watching you do the podcast with me.
Yeah,
because you're like. We need to explain. You're sitting in your living room on an ottoman, is it, or something?
No, it's just a chair.
You're just like going for it in the middle of the living room at your kid's bedtime. Like, that's just really gutsy.
It's brave, man. I'm gonna talk about walk on the wild side. Here's really why I'm in the living room tonight. Normally, the podcast is what I do on Tuesday nights when Jenny has her women's life group. Mm-hmm. So if she's at a ladies' life group, I'm either recording a podcast with you, I'm playing Nintendo with the kids, or I'm watching a war movie. So these are the things I do while she's at her ladies' Bible study. But tonight, her life group did not meet. And so she looked at me and she just said, I just adore you so much. I just want to be in the same room with you. Don't leave me. And I said, darling, I guess I'll grace you with my presence tonight. And so this is my way. She's rolling her eyes and shaking her head at me.
Yeah. So can she hear what I'm saying?
She can, yeah. So.
Oh, okay. So it's like we have to share you tonight, apparently, huh?
Yeah. So just keep it PG, you know.
Yeah.
It's not like anybody's listening anyway to these after they go out. So.
No.
Yeah. So how are you, man?
Doing good. Made it back from Cocoa Beach. So you got the T-shirt and all. I didn't plan that, I promise. I'm wearing a Cocoa Beach shirt, but went to the Space Coast Marathon. I did that Sunday and.
Awesome.
Got a personal record, 4 hours and 15 minutes, but
not
the sub 4 hours I was shooting for, but I'm good with it. I survived.
So let's see. Last year when you and I did the Seven Bridges Marathon in Chattanooga, you were 4 hours and 55 minutes. Is that right?
Yeah, 4:50 something in there. Yeah. Sounds right.
Okay. And then this year you did a marathon.
I did one in Hoover, Alabama. Yeah, okay. I did one in Hoover, which is a suburb of Birmingham. And that one just beat me up. It was really hot, and I slept in our van the night before in the parking lot, so just didn't sleep well. Yeah, didn't sleep well. You know.
What was your time in that one?
Oh, like 5 hours, 15 minutes. Super slow. I mean, I had to stop and walk so much.
Just because of the heat and everything?
Yeah. Just the heat. The hills were just brutal. Poor sleep. Woke up with a headache. You know,
that's the worst, man.
Yeah, but yeah. So this one I took off an hour, so that's reassuring. But
that's awesome, man.
Yeah, I started off with a group that was running 830 miles, and I hung with them for 18 miles before.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, my body was just like, dude, stop. You need to stop. I stopped for about 3 seconds to get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that was on the side of the road that people were handing out. Mm-hmm. It's way less creepy if you're there.
I was about to say, just some random person that's just like, hey, you want some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?
But as soon as I did that, as soon as I stopped, I was like, I should not have done that. You know, if you've ever run a marathon, you know, it's just like your muscles immediately when they stop being engaged, they just automatically just want to tense up and cramp up. And so I did that. They locked up on me like a set of brakes did, and I couldn't really get going again. But anyways.
So how much of it, which, man, 4:15 is nothing to sneeze at. That's amazing. That's awesome. Congratulations. That's a really, really good PR. How much of it, though, do you think was the difference between flat terrain and hill terrain?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and yeah, definitely. So I had another month of training and then another month of really good training. And then, almost completely flat course. So yeah, it really set me up for success.
Yeah.
Those two factors. But
So I have a wild idea, and I'm going to
Mhm.
see what you think about it. All right.
You want to do it again with me next year?
Well, not that one. Here's
Okay.
my idea. You had said, I think you told me that you had said that you're kind of done with marathons for a little bit.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
you ran 2, and then you're like, hey, I'm gonna hang it up for a bit. Um,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking of running the Nashville half marathon at the end of April this year, the
Okay.
Music City marathon,
Hmm.
but just doing the half. 13.1, not 26.2.
Yeah.
And I think I got some guys from my church that ran, the marathon we did together. I think I got some of them interested. So what if you came up and you ran that marathon? I mean, that half marathon.
Which one, the Nashville or the Seven
Yeah, the
Bridges?
Nashville. What do you think?
The rock and roll running series one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll look at the calendar and see what's going on at the end of April.
Listen, 30,000 runners most of the time.
Goodness.
Yeah. The entire route of the half is just packed with people. And there's bands, and you run past Belmont University and Vanderbilt University, and there's like college students out there that are, they've got like tables out there, and they're, giving you water stops. I mean, it's just so much fun. It's one of
Yeah.
the most fun races I've ever done. So anyway, just stick
That
that in
sounds
your
cool.
pipe and smoke it. And
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of sounds like the Huntsville marathon. The one they take you, it's kind of like space themed, where they take you through all the historic places in Huntsville where they, famous NASA engineers and people from Nazi Germany lived, and then they take you through the rocket garden and all that. So that sounds kind of cool.
that's pretty cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not too far from Huntsville, so that might be a fun race to do sometime together. So
Yeah. We did a
interesting.
5K not too long ago. It's called Conquer the Cave. It's in Huntsville area. And
Yeah, I
you're not
remember you
too
telling
far
me about
from
that.
that. Yeah, that
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
really cool experience.
Huh.
You run a good half of it, I think, in a cave. So that was a lot of fun. So,
Interesting.
yeah, no shortage of cool running events for sure.
This is true. One of these days, we'll try to get a Ragnar team together. You know what the Ragnar is?
No.
It's a relay race, and you've got a van, and you have a team of like anywhere from 8 to 15 people, and you run little stints of the relay, and somebody drives your van all the way up.
Hmm.
And yeah, that'd be a ton of fun to put a team together.
Yeah.
So many races, so little time. Mm. And by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, this is a LaCroix, so I don't think, in case people were wondering if I was drinking
You're not
something.
drinking a Michelob.
Drinking one of them Milwaukee's Beast.
Bud
So,
Light.
Gabe, I was at a coffee shop not too long ago, and I've been asking the Lord to give me opportunities to share the gospel with people, and then trying to be really intentional about getting out of my office at church and being at places that is not just church people or Christian people. And there's a coffee shop that I like to go to called Brass Horn Coffee. And there was this young lady that was there sitting next to me talking with her friend, and struck up a conversation with them about something. And this lady had deconstructed from her faith. Like she said, she grew up in a Christian home, but she deconstructed because she saw all sorts of abuses and not good stuff. And I was just kind of trying to engage the conversation and keep pointing her back to Jesus, and keep using the technique of, she would make a truth claim, and I would say, hey, how did you come to that conclusion? And really just trying to engage her in that. And she made this claim that I thought was really interesting. She said, if God is all powerful and he can prevent all evil and suffering, and he is all knowing, so he knows about all evil and suffering, and he is all good, so he could prevent all evil and suffering, and evil and suffering exist, then how can an all powerful, all knowing, and all good God exist? Because all of that is contradictory. And it was kind of, I think, her checkmate question, for lack of a better term. She kind of thought that, in throwing that out there and slamming those cards on the table, that, that was just sort of game, set, match, that would end the discussion. And I kind of listened, and I said, hey, that's a really Really good question. I think that's a question that philosophers have been wrestling with for thousands of years, since the dawn of time. Um, but it was intriguing to me. It was intriguing to me that she brought that up. And so I thought it'd be interesting tonight if we kind of unpack that and talk through how one might answer a question like that.
Hmm.
Have you ever had somebody ask you that question?
Yeah. It's a valid question.
Now, do
Yeah.
you think people get there um, intellectually? Do you think people get there emotionally? Or do you think people get there from perhaps being influenced to ask that question when maybe it's not one they've actually wrestled with?
Yeah, I think it's by and large emotional response to something they've encountered. Someone who's claimed to be a person of faith, a follower of God, yet misrepresented, like your friend you were talking to.
Hmm.
Because you can't get there rationally. It's an impossibility, because even, I mean, God doesn't have to be, there doesn't have to be a good God for there to be a God. Um,
Hmm.
there just has to be a creator, and the creator could have whatever nature he wants to have. It's only this kind of like scoffing at the notion of a, what the God of the Bible presupposes as a good God, and
Right.
people really take issue with. So yeah, rationally, you can't get there. It's usually an emotional response.
Because you're saying that, like, if you believed in a creator God, why would that creator God have to be the Christian God that relates to people as a kind, loving, benevolent father?
Yeah. I mean, a God can be whatever he wants to be. He's,
Right.
it's only when we say there seems to be evil, which is kind of self defeating in and of itself, because if there isn't a God, then what is evil? But there seems to be evil, even though I don't know what the definition of evil is. How can there be a God that you say is good?
Hmm.
That's usually an emotionally driven um, kind of tension there that's happening, within someone's consciousness, I guess.
Yeah. Well, is this a philosophical premise that has ever rattled your faith personally or caused you to doubt? I mean, you've been through some stuff in your life, just like I think most people have.
Yeah.
Is there ever a time in your life when you've seen suffering and it's caused you maybe to doubt the goodness of God or His
Hmm.
care for you?
No, not necessarily. I've seen suffering and maybe experienced hardship, but I've always said, God, how does this fit into your plan? This doesn't seem um, this doesn't seem fair in the moment. But I've never said there must not be a God because of this.
Hmm.
Um, I just tend to question it. Before I question that, I tend to question God's goodness
Yeah.
or his justice, which is like really funny to think about now in retrospect, because I'm like, here I am, this peon with a little 3-pound brain trying to question God's sense of divine sovereignty.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and thinking about that for me, I think there's been times maybe when I don't think I've ever been through a time when I have seriously doubted or questioned the existence of God,
Mm-hmm.
because I've just seen too much. Right. I feel like the evidence of creation, the evidence of design, the fact that we are intelligently designed and the world seems to be held together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at times when I've kind of cracked the door open to deconstruction and started walking down that path, it never could lead me to a flat out denial of the existence of God, because there's just way too much evidence out there. I could just never accept the premise that no one plus nothing equals everything we see. That just didn't make sense to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think when I've gone through tough times or when I've seen suffering, um, and even suffering, I think more from watching others suffer, maybe not necessarily suffering that I've experienced, but just watching other people like lose a child or lose a spouse or battle a long term illness. Um, it can cause you to have to sit back and say, okay, God, your word says you're good, but this situation doesn't look good
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't feel good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, how can it be good? And I think that's a very human response to suffering that I mean, as long as we have been here on this planet, as long as humanity has been around, we've been asking that question.
Hmm. Yeah, there's like this for all my life you have been faithful. You know that song?
Yeah. Goodness of
And then
God.
it goes, I will sing of the goodness of God. But there's like all these video clips you can watch of young worship teams in their 20s and 30s singing that song. But there's one clip I found on Instagram, this reel of like these people in their 80s, 70s or 80s who are
Mm-hmm.
playing that song. Either they're not doing this like necessarily a bang up job on playing that song like you would think
Right.
maybe like at one of these big churches would do, but one of the comments that really struck me on there was like, it hits different coming from people my grandparents' age.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dang, like that's so true. Like these people are in their 70s, 80s singing this song, and it's like, all my life you have been faithful, and so I will sing of the goodness of God. Versus like a 20-year-old singing that, it's like these people have been through some stuff.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of their life, here they are saying, I will sing of the goodness of God.
Yeah.
That takes, like, there's just a lot more miles, I think, and a lot more experiences that they've had to go through. So I think it's easy for us to say like, oh, God's good, in our 20s, 30s, even 40s, or God's not good because we're angry. But like when we get close to that finish line of our life, it's like, what song are we singing then? And really, really kind of stood out to me as something to kind of ponder more, I guess.
Yeah, man. Oh, that's powerful. I mean, it's definitely one of these things. I think the older I get, the more I've seen of the brokenness of people,
Mm-hmm.
the more I've seen of just the darkness of sin and what sin can do to destroy.
Mm.
But I think I'm just like incredibly amazed at how, even in the face of that, God he's been so patient with me and so kind to me, and I see his goodness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's not it's not really something that I think I would have been able to understand 10 years ago if I could have sat down and told a version of how my life would turn out to me 10 years ago. It's like you see the goodness of God on a different level. I mean, I think about when Jenny and I we were married for a while before we decided that we wanted to start having children, and we struggled to get pregnant for a while. We had friends around us that are having babies and announcing pregnancies, and that was kind of painful. The more time went on, we couldn't have children, and then we got pregnant, and we were so excited, and then we lost that pregnancy.
Mm.
And man, that really, really hurt. But around that same time, I think I experienced kind of the nearness of God and the comfort of God in a way that I never would have known otherwise.
Yeah.
And so, as painful as it was, it's like you look back on that now and you go, man, that was awful, that was painful, that hurt. But I saw something about God's goodness in the face of it, which is strange that some of the moments of greatest suffering in our life are the moments when we see the goodness of God clearest.
Yeah.
Well, in apologetics, there is a certain phrase, and it's called theodicy. And I actually didn't know this phrase until I started reading about it and started reading up on it. Have you heard this phrase before, theodicy?
No, never.
Yeah, so there's actually like a whole field of apologetics that is centered around theodicy. And theodicy is the defense of God's goodness and omnipotence in the face of evil. So it is the philosophical argument that attempts to reconcile the existence of evil with God's power and God's goodness. And so there are people who have written all sorts of stuff about it, have talked through it. And this is like some old ancient wisdom that we're talking about. Because I guess since humanity's been asking this question for as long as humanity's been around, people have been responding to it and saying, actually, God can be good and God is good even though there is evil. And here's kind of how we reconcile that, right? So there's 4 theodicies that we'll look at tonight. There's probably much more than this, but there's 4 main ones when you start studying the field of apologetics. The first is called the free will theodicy. And this is kind of how I responded to that young lady in the coffee shop with the free will theosophy. I wish we would have done this episode before, so I would have known how to respond to her a little bit more. But the free will theosophy says evil exists because God gave humans free will, and free will allows for genuine love and moral growth, but free will also allows the possibility of moral evil, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of puts the impetus back on us in that situation. It's like, instead of, hey, how can there be a good God if there's evil in the world? It's like, instead the question is turned on its head. It's like, how can a good God tolerate us making evil decisions?
Right.
What a merciful and loving God we have that is willing to put up with humanity, be patient with us.
Well, and it's pretty self-righteous, and it's pretty blind of us to say, look at all this evil in the world, but never once do we look in the mirror and say, look at the evil that's in me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have this tendency to be able to spot evil everywhere. We just can't see it in ourselves, right? But the truth is that our choices are meaningful, and God has given us the ability to choose, and free will is necessary for love. It's one of the greatest gifts that God has given us, the ability to love. And so genuine love requires the ability to choose. Like, if we love somebody, it has to be volitional. It can't be coerced. It can't be programmed, or that would be meaningless, right? So if we have free will from God, then God allows us the capacity to love him authentically and to love one another authentically as well, right? So if I got me one of those new Tesla robots, which, by the way, have you seen the new Tesla robots?
No, I don't think so.
They're amazing. Jenny just got really excited about them. She wants to buy one. She's the one that she wants a Tesla robot for Christmas.
What do they do?
To clean. They do anything, everything.
Optimus?
They're not on the market yet.
Is it the Optimus Tesla's?
I think that's what it's called. Do you remember what it's called, Jenny? The Optimus. Yeah, they can do anything.
Yeah, but
and eventually they will. They're going to take over the world.
Wake up in the middle of the night and that thing's standing over your bed, though. Like, how do you deal with that?
Listen, if we had a fully staffed house with a Tesla robot, can you imagine how awesome it would be to go to bed at night and program your robot to clean up after your kids and to clean your kitchen while you're sleeping, so you wake up the next morning and your house is clean?
Yeah.
Imagine how amazing that is.
Would you be willing to put up with that thing standing over your bed at night, watching you sleep, though? Like, in exchange for it doing the dishes?
A clean house in the morning? I think so. Yeah, that's a great exchange.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Elon, if you're listening, I could use one of those Optimus robots.
Why do they name it Optimus, though? That's so.
Does it really? Let's look up.
Yeah, I think it's called Optimus. Like, they should have named it like Jennifer or something, like something very non-combative.
Did you hear that, Jenny?
Oh yeah, but it's like,
like, oh yeah, Jenny's name is Jennifer.
No, Josh, for yours, like, don't name yours Jennifer, okay? But like the Optimus sounds like it's just primed and ready to take over the world.
That is true. I'm looking right now. There's videos of Optimus now walking autonomously on rough terrain.
Now we're
Optimus robot walking as it rings a bell. Yeah. So who knows, man?
Yeah.
Who knows?
But yeah, we'd be a bunch of Optimuses.
Yeah. We would be a bunch of robots, right? So if we were robots programmed to say, I love you to God and I worship you to God, that's not real love and that's not real worship. And so humans have the ability to authentically and sincerely and genuinely choose to love or choose not to love. And so because we have free will, that makes us morally responsible for our actions. And if we didn't have any free will, there would be no such thing as accountability. There'd be no such thing as growth in character. There'd be no such thing really as morality, right?
Yeah.
Because that would a world without free will would just reduce us to a bunch of automatons. So why do we have evil? Well, God could theoretically prevent all evil by overriding this beautiful gift called human freedom, but doing so would negate the purpose of creating morally significant beings, right?
Yeah.
And so with those who say, if God's so powerful, then why won't he just come in and stop evil? Well, preventing all moral evil would require a world where God intervenes constantly, making our free will practically meaningless. And so the ability to choose between good and evil, and that's essential for us to grow personally, spiritually, in our character, to make decisions that are ethical and God honoring, to make the choice to follow Jesus and say yes to Jesus and yes to God in obedience.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the problem of free will, that's an issue if you take on this whole, if God is so good, why doesn't he just stop evil? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the free will theocity. Can you see any counter arguments to the free will theocity?
Mm. I mean, the only one really is like, well, why did he create us with free will? Why?
Yeah.
Why did he bother doing that to create so much pain? Why did he even bother creating us?
Right.
That's a whole other set of questions, but like, that's the only counter I could come up with at this time.
Well, and I think I have to put myself in the mindset of somebody that doesn't really have a lot of faith or trust in a God.
Mm-hmm.
Where I go when somebody goes, well, why would God create us in the first place? It's probably like, well, because he's God and he doesn't have to ask your permission to do what he wants to do, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's where I go. But, I think that that's probably my bias. I've always kind of had faith. And even when I wasn't, a follower of Jesus, I still had faith in God. I had faith that there was a God,
Yeah.
So that's the free will theocity. There is a second theocity called the soul-making theocity. And the soul-making theocity essentially says suffering provides opportunities for growth, for character development, and the deepening of virtue. So it's the idea that we were talking about earlier of like the times when we have seen God's goodness and experienced God's goodness and have grown the most in our life are times when we have experienced significant pain and suffering and hardship. Because it's in the face of those, in the midst of those, we develop things like patience and resilience and compassion and humility. So people who have endured great suffering usually are people with a lot deeper empathy and understanding for other people
Mm-hmm.
who've gone through that pain.
Yeah.
Do you find that makes you a better pastor to relate to people who have walked through similar situations that you've walked through?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anytime you're walking through hardships or suffering and you come out on the other side, your faith is stronger, but also, that has refined you, and made you stronger to where you can, definitely encourage someone who's going through that as well. For sure.
Yeah, I think we have this this confusion in our minds that the good life here on earth would be the life that has no difficulty or challenges or pain, right? We think a
Mm-hmm.
world of ease and comfort would be what's best for us. But the truth is, a world of ease and comfort that has no difficulty, no challenges, no suffering, no pain, it would produce very shallow, self-centered individuals who really don't have any opportunity to grow in moral depth or to grow in any sort of virtue. And I think that's the reason why when you meet a kid who's been spoiled rotten, right? They
Mm-hmm.
usually aren't good people when they.
Yeah.
We all can point out people we went to high school with that were like, spoiled rotten, and their daddy bought them a new Jeep Grand Cherokee and everything they wanted. It's like, man, you're
Mm-hmm.
a really difficult person to have empathy or to see anybody
Right.
beyond yourself, right? I think Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this too, about how suffering produces resilience and growth. Have you heard him talk about that?
No, not in recent memory. I don't really watch a lot of Jordan Peterson, but
Should I channel my inner Jordan Peterson?
have you seen that guy that
Because a
does the?
world with suffering helps us grow. And if you're not growing, then you're just a sorry human being.
Have you seen that guy that does like the little sketch where he's like one day of listening to Jordan Peterson, and it's like 1 week of listening to Jordan Peterson, and it shows like what his appearance and everything. It's like 1 year of listening to Jordan Peterson. He's like dressed just like him and same manners. It's really funny.
The suspenders and the tweed jacket. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know this from being an athlete, from being a marathoner. Training can be very, 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 very painful at times.
Yeah.
But there is no way for you to strengthen your body. There's no way for you to get stronger and better and faster and develop more endurance unless you push your body through that strain and through those painful seasons. And like so much in the Bible about how suffering strengthens us spiritually. It helps us grow in our resilience in knowing how to keep pushing through and not giving in to temptation, not throwing in the towel,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some verses that would say that. What's the one that says suffering produces perseverance? Here, I'll look that up. You can pontificate about deep theological truths, so I'm doing that.
Talking about James 5.
Is that the one? I have that in the show notes. Let's see. Here's the one I was thinking of. Romans 5:3. It says, not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. So, yeah, man, that's like cool. a very biblical thing.
Yeah.
That when we go through it, God is growing us and God is shaping us, and he's using it and he's allowing it in our lives to make us look more like Jesus. And Jesus showed the example of what it's like to suffer. And suffering gives us a greater appreciation for joy and goodness too. Like if your life was nothing but sunny days and ice cream and, everything was great all the time, it causes you to almost grow entitled and think that somehow you've earned that and you deserve it. And when you've gone through some tough times, when the good days come, it produces in you a gratitude for that.
Yeah.
Can you think of a time? And go ahead.
I was going to say James 1 is very focused on the idea of, he says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, and let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Yeah. But yeah, were you about to say, can I think of a time?
Yeah. I mean, can you think of a time in your life when after you'd gone through some suffering, when the good times showed back up, like how much different your appreciation was for the good times after having gone through some really tough times?
I mean, not me. I got to think of an example, but I was just thinking. First thing in mind was like Stacy giving birth to all of our children. It's like this. There's a great deal of suffering that she has to go through,
right?
And pain, and then it's like this beautiful joy that comes with having this child that you brought into this world. You can hold it for the first time, and I can't really relate to that, but it's like,
oh, you ran a marathon. You too can relate.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I can fully relate.
My wife just groaned the other side of the room.
Yeah. Well, I tell Stacey, like, she birthed 4 children. I've run 5 marathons, so like I'm kind of the authority on the subject matters now. So
when your wife hears this podcast, she's gonna murder you. So
yeah, I'm like, you have to catch up with me. I mean, to really know. But no, I was doing my best to not make marathon and birthing comparisons here, but whatever.
That's true. Yeah.
No, I know that pushing a human being out of your body is far harder than running a marathon. So
yes.
But it's I just recently I picked a new hobby and got into casting, like melting and casting metal.
Yeah, I saw that on your Facebook. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
So I work in the construction industry and I walk around houses a lot all day long. And one of the things that I started doing was just picking up like pieces of copper wire that electricians leave on the ground and just going to get swept up and thrown in the trash. It's like purposeless. It has no destiny or purpose to it. And so I take it and put it in a bucket, and then um, me and the boys have fun. Sometimes we strip it and we cut it into little links. But we have twice now melted our kind of like what we've been saving up in copper and stuff. And um, most recently, we made some really cool coins. We melted them and poured them into this mold. But yeah, there's all kinds of like little lessons and stuff you can learn. And the boys and I were just geeking out over it. But like, you're heating this crucible full of this copper wire just to an unimaginable, like the crucible is just glowing red hot inside this furnace. And you're like, goodness, how can it withstand that much heat? And then you just see this copper wire down inside there just start to liquefy. It's so cool. But there's of course like contaminants in it, and you have to like those float to the surface. And I take this piece of steel rod and I stir it around in there, and all the contaminants cling to that steel rod. And then I pull that steel rod out of the molten copper, and that's all the slag, like the pollutants that I needed to get out to purify that copper so that I could make this really pretty coin out of it. So we made this past Sunday, we made several these little coins out of copper, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. We're going to do it again here in a couple of weeks, but just a lot of biblical lessons about suffering through that process of doing that and melting that, and refinement and purifying, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, and that idea that God allows us in His goodness
Mm-hmm.
to maybe walk through some tough times, that when we're in the moment, we look at it and we go, man, this doesn't feel good. I don't like this.
Yeah.
But God sees more than we see, and He sees the person He's making us into by allowing that pressure and that pain into our lives to shape us into what we could never become without it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was now bound to be just trash
Yeah.
is a keepsake that, me and my boys will have the rest of our lives. Like, hey, we made these coins. That's super cool.
Yeah.
And now it has like value and meaning to it,
Yeah, man. This is a quote by C.S. Lewis. This kind of goes along with the idea that we can experience the presence of God in a deeper and more meaningful way when we're going through suffering. It says, pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. And man, I can attest to that truth. I think some of the times I have heard God and experienced Him in a profound way have been some of the difficult times and painful times of my life. And the times when I feel like God seems really far away and I can't hear Him is when I'm, enamored with the pleasures of this world, right? Nothing necessarily bad, but it's like, hey, it's college football season, and I'm enjoying this hobby over here and doing this fun thing over here, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, hey God, I should probably have my quiet time today, right? And then you go through that time of suffering. It's like you're clinging to Him with everything you've got, because without that, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that is the soul-making theosity. Ready for the next one?
Yeah.
Next one would be called the greater good theosity. And that is the idea that God allows evil and suffering to bring about a greater good that humans may not fully comprehend. So, Gabe, I've heard you talk about the story of Joseph and how the story of Joseph is full of all sorts of messianic promises for the Jewish people. But the story of Joseph is also chock full of terrible things that Joseph has to walk through, right? I mean, it's the whole story of the Jewish people. It's the whole story of the promises of how the Jewish Messiah is going to. Which, by the way, it's been a while since you talked about that. You want to give us just like a real quick snapshot of kind of what you've probably written and spoken about the story of Joseph and how that has something to do with the messianic promises of Israel.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just not even just Israel, but also the whole world. Because Joseph was this Hebrew shepherd who was betrayed by his brothers for silver, put into a pit in the ground and then raised back out of that pit, then sold to this non-Hebrew empire, and then rose in the ranks in notoriety. He became the savior of that known Gentile world, and very, very powerful. And then, at a time of famine and desperation, his brothers seek him. They seek him. They seek him, not knowing it's him. But he eventually reveals his identity to them. But they're so famished that they go to Egypt for food. And then there's this moment of forgiveness after they look on him whom they have betrayed. There's this moment of like deep forgiveness and repentance that happens as well. It's kind of a cool picture of like salvation for the Gentile world and salvation for the Jewish world, both coming together under this one man who's a picture of the suffering servant, kind of like Isaiah 53 kind of stuff.
Yeah. So at any point during the story of Joseph, I'm sure Joseph did not see or could not see how him being sold into slavery, how him being falsely accused of sexual assault, how him being forgotten about in prison, none of those things felt good or redemptive.
Yeah.
They all felt like very unfair, very terrible, very senseless personal tragedies, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we look back now, and Joseph, near the end of his life, in Genesis 50, he says to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good."
Yeah.
And it's this idea that we are finite human beings kind of stuck in this moment, and we can't fully grasp maybe the broader purposes that God has in allowing certain evils in our lives. And it appears senseless to us. It appears purposeless to us.
Yeah.
But it actually may serve a greater divine plan, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it says in Genesis 50, what you just quoted is like, God, you meant evil, but God meant good in order to bring about a great salvation. And I think it's a really cool picture. It uses the Hebrew verb chashav, which is where it says, "But as for you chashav against me evil, but God chashav against or for me for good, in order to bring about a great salvation." But that word chashav, it's like literally means to weave, like a tapestry weaving.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, when someone starts off weaving something, you can't really tell early in the stages of what they're trying to do. Only like the weaver has a picture, a vision in their mind of what the final product's going to be. And so all these different threads are going through, and it's like, what is this going to look like? And that's the kind of picture of Joseph's trying to draw in his brothers' minds, is like God wove a great story together here for us that saved the civilized world from famine, which is a prophetic picture. Bread is always a picture of the word of God, and it's like there would be a great time of famine for the word of God, and people will be starving for it and for revelation of who God is. So I think it's neat. Sometimes God is weaving our lives together, and we begin to question, like, what are you doing with that thread there? That is a painful thread, or that is uncomfortable for me to experience. I don't see the bigger picture. And then it's not till years and years later, they were like, oh, that's why I had to go through that.
Yeah.
Because of this moment here or whatever.
Yeah. I think about my kids too. Last year, we went to a amusement park called Holiday World in Santa Claus, Indiana. This is a real place.
This sounds really sketchy. Okay.
It kind of is. The second day we were there, we went to the water park, and it was actually not a good day for the water park. It was, I think the heat index was like 105 or something. It was packed.
Wow.
We were all tired because we'd been out the day before riding roller coasters. Anyway, my daughter, who was 5 at the time, she slipped and busted her eye on one of the water slides.
Oh.
So we had to pack her up and go to the emergency room in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, which, if you can just imagine everything that comes to your mind when you think of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, that's yes, you thought right. And she needed stitches for her good, right? But when we got in there and we were telling her, like, okay, here's what we need to do to give you stitches, she's like screaming, insinuating that like we're gonna hurt her when we're trying to help her, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's for her own good that she gets the stitches.
Yeah.
That's actually gonna help her, but she can't see that. All she sees is, I don't want to get stitches because that's gonna hurt.
Right.
But we're going, but yeah, but like we understand that it's gonna help you far greater.
Yeah.
And your discomfort here in the moment is actually pointing to your healing later on down the road.
Mm-hmm.
But she can't see that because she's 5, right? Did you ever hear what happened in that emergency room besides just that?
No.
Did I ever tell you that story?
No.
Okay. So we were there with Jenny's parents at the water park. And we sent the boys home with Jenny's parents. They took the boys home. It's about a 3-hour drive back to our house. And so the boys went home with Tom and Debbie, Jenny's mom and dad. And I had Grace and Jenny in the van, and we go to Hopkinsville, which is not far from this part of Indiana. And I dropped Jenny and Grace off at the entrance to the emergency room, and then went and parked the van. And as I'm walking through the parking lot, Jenny calls me and she said, "Hey, there's something in the van I need you to go back and get. And also, everybody here inside is saying that there's like a mentally unstable person that just got out of the psych ward that is there running around in the parking lot trying to break into cars. So watch out for her."
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So right as Jenny said that, I turned around and I looked, and here's this lady in tattered scrubs that's literally climbing on the roof of like a Toyota Camry and jumping up and down.
Wow.
And here comes the hospital security, like in the little, white Ford Ranger with the big, blinking light. This big old guy gets out and he throws open the door and he's like, "Get down from the top of the car." And this lady's like, "No." And she's jumping up and down. And I'm standing there watching this and I'm like, okay, I got to get this out of the van. She's there.
But this is pretty entertaining.
This is really entertaining. My van is right here. So I start walking towards the van, just kind of keeping an eye on her. And she finally gets off the roof of the Camry and she starts running towards me in the van.
Oh.
And I'm like, and I look at her and I go, "Hey, ma'am, hey." I gave her one of those.
Yeah.
And she's getting closer. And I look at her and I say, "Hey, if you touch my vehicle, I'm tackling you." And she just like ignores me, runs around me, and starts to grab the door of the van to start to try to yank it open.
Wow.
And so I tackled her.
Nice. Okay.
And I took her down to the ground on there was like a median with grass. So I waited till she got in the grass, then I tackled her. And then when I did, that's when the hospital security guy came up and he's like, "Oh, thanks, man. Thanks. I can't technically do that, but thank you." And so then he put her in like zip ties and walked her up to the front. I got what we needed from the van. I walked in and there was a whole audience of all these people that were smoking and wearing like camo and Mountain Dew hats, like watching me. And they were like, "Hey, man, good job, man." And then I came inside and all the hospital staff was laughing really hard because they watched me do it. And then Jenny told them I was a pastor and they got a big kick out of that. So,
oh man, that's so.
That was my experience in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. So
yeah.
Then we all went to Waffle House for supper. Then we all went to a Waffle House. It was a good time.
So that's the greater good, Theodicy. We got one more. Ready for the last one?
Yeah.
The eschatological hope, Theodicy. So we talk about eschatology. What are we talking about?
In times. Like the eschaton. Eschaton is like in days, right? Final days.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
eschatological would be like the the study of the end times, or
Mm-hmm.
thoughts on the end times?
So the eschatological hope
Hmm.
would be the hope that we have in the world to come, not in this world.
Yeah.
And so it's the idea that the promise of ultimate justice, the promise of restoration in the world to come, kind of relieves this tension that we experience now between God's evil, or not God's evil, God's never evil, between evil in this world and the goodness of God. So it's this
Hmm.
idea that because God permits us to make choices that are, we have the volition to do it, right? We have free will to do it. There's moral evil that happens in the world because we as humans choose the wrong thing that contributes to suffering, right?
Hmm.
But God, in his mercy and his goodness, through that, allows some of those things to happen for both the shaping of us into the people he wants us to be and for the greater good. That there's all sorts of good things that can come out of suffering that we can't see in the moment. But the story of Scripture says that ultimately all wrongs that happen on this earth is they're going to be made right. Like evil
Hmm.
is eventually going to be punished, and God's justice ensures that there is not going to be a single act of evil anywhere that's going to go unanswered.
Hmm.
And so our human justice systems now, I mean, they're flawed, they're imperfect. We don't get things right, and it may seem like from our point of view on earth that, man, there's people that get away with a lot of stuff. But when we believe that there's a God in heaven that is the ultimate judge, man, that gives us assurance that like there is no wrong that is ever done. There's no evil that is ever taking place that God is not going to deal with
Hmm.
perfectly and finally. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think, what sets us apart from this worldview of like hopelessness and nihilism. Is like
Yeah.
we have hope. We recognize evil for what it is, but we have hope. Like Revelation 21, provides this assurance for us that suffering will be no more.
Hmm.
That evil is temporary. So when we look down at our existence and the story of God's creation and God's creating of humanity, we see that, yeah, he gave us free will. He allows us to make some really bad decisions, but through his empathy expressed in Christ, that evil is temporary.
Yeah.
We have hope. We have assurance of hope, and I think that's the key to this argument when having this discussion with someone is saying, bringing it back to that and saying, where in what do you place your hope?
Hmm. Yeah.
You and I both agree that there is evil in this world. There's great evil in this world. We might disagree on the goodness of God because of the presence of that evil, but in what do we put hope in? Because I think people want hope. People
Right.
long for that. People need hope. They say you can live 2 minutes without oxygen, but only 2 seconds without hope.
Well, I wonder if in the absence of a belief in a God that is the perfect judge who someday is going to make all wrong things right, you have to replace God with something, right?
Yeah.
And so if you remove that hope and that belief in a God that is a God of perfect justice, man, you're left with trying to replace God with maybe the role of government
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or maybe the role of like social causes
Yeah.
or social revolutions, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. We all need a religion. Like, this,
Yeah.
I was saying that to Noah the other Sunday or Monday. He ran a half marathon on Sunday in addition to me doing the full marathon. But, at the end of it, we were kind of comparing notes and everything. And he's like, yeah, it's super early in the morning. It's like, some of those people out there are just super annoying at the start line. I'm like, what do you mean? Explain. He's like, well, they're so intense and this is like their life. You can tell they just do this like once a week and they're just obsessed with it. and he's like, they're pumping each other up and talking about their times and all this stuff. And I was like, sounds a lot like a religious community, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
this is what they put their hope in. This is what they
Right.
live. And it was this cool opportunity for me to explain to him that like, these are people who are obsessed with all the wrong things. There's nothing wrong, obviously, with doing these kinds of events, but when you make that your identity and you make that your religious system, obviously that's idolatrous. Right. And those people need to know that this life is temporal, and their achievements, how many medals they earn or whatever, that is all meaningless in the kingdom of God. But everyone needs a religion. Everyone needs a faith system that they can put hope in. And the question is, are you putting hope in what is true and eternal?
And even what's sufficient to deliver you the salvation that it's promising.
Mm-hmm.
So if you remove God from the equation and then you say, okay, there's suffering in the world. Well, how do we fix the suffering? Well, we fix the suffering through social revolution, right? The oppressors need to replace, the oppressed needs to replace the oppressors, and that'll rid the world of suffering. Well, will it really? Does that correspond to reality historically, right? And the truth is, if you're just being intellectually honest, of course not, right?
Yeah.
So the problem of evil doesn't go away if you remove God from the equation. Instead, you're left with a bunch of bankrupt saviors that can never actually deliver on the promises that your soul is aching and longing for. I think it was C.S. Lewis that talked about how we've been created with eternity in our hearts. And so if we find in ourselves a desire for something that this world cannot satisfy, the most obvious conclusion is we were made for another world. I'm paraphrasing and probably messed that quote up, but I think all of us, we long for a day when evil is done away with. And I think that's an apologetic for the fact that we have been made in the image and likeness of God. Because why would we want a place where there's no evil if there is no place where there is no evil, right? And I think that's just a giant signpost that says we long for heaven because we were made in the image and likeness of God. We were made for a relationship with God, and everything in us longs for heaven. The question is, sometimes we don't want to turn to God in order to get there.
Yeah, that'll preach.
Yeah. This is good stuff, man. This is stuff, again, I wish we'd have done this episode before I had that conversation.
Yeah. Well, the conversation will come up again, and we can share this with people.
It does.
I want to say hello to Nicholas. He met me in person the other day and said he listens to the podcast, and I want to give him a shout out and say thank you, Nicholas, for listening. I hope hope this episode in particular encouraged you, and thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicholas. That's super cool.
Yeah.
We're also nearing the end of the year, and if you are a perennial listener, you know what that means.
What does that mean?
You don't know what it means?
I could hear Jenny.
Jenny doesn't know what it means. She's gonna. I thought you said you.
We should have Jenny in the background every episode. I think that would be cool.
Exactly.
To have our wives like off camera.
Yeah, producer Jenny's over here. Producer Jenny, look that up on Google.
Just like low key correcting us on every other little thing that we say.
Yeah, well, that's what they do best. Two things it means. Number one, somebody reminded me of this. Oh, Alan Austin, who's also a regular listener. So shout out to Alan. He reminded me of this. He said, hey, every year for the past 3 years, you guys have always checked the price of Bitcoin and compared it to the previous year.
No.
Did you know you started doing that?
I knew that I did that, but I didn't know that it was every December.
I think it's either every September or October. So that's the one thing we missed.
Has it already been a year? Because I know that I did that one time, but
we've done it twice. We did it when we talked about cryptocurrency 2 years ago, and then we did it in the 1 year anniversary, because we said during the crypto year that during the crypto episode, a year from that, we were going to check the price. And then you did, and then you said, "Hey, let's do this every single year," and then we forgot.
Okay. No,
That's
I
the first.
forget. Yeah.
But
I
the
have to
second
s- I-
thing, are you checking it now?
Yeah, I'm checking it now.
Okay.
Oh, it's only $97,339 per
Oh,
Bitcoin. Good God. That's
I think it
insane.
actually has skyrocketed since Trump took office.
Yeah, it has all
He's
of crypto
promised not
stuff
to
took off.
regulate it. Yeah. So anyway,
What's the second thing that we do at the end of the year?
well, we take listener questions so that we can do our From the Mailbag episode.
Oh, okay. All right.
You know this.
Mm.
So there's plenty of time. I think we might do one more episode before the end of the year. But there's plenty of time for people to come up with questions that they want to hear.
What do the questions have to be about? Can they be like, hey, one thing I am going to, I want listener support on this. So check this out. This is going to blow your mind.
Okay.
I want to, whenever football season starts in 2025, is that usually in the fall that it starts? Okay.
Yes, that's when it starts.
I want to pick a team and follow that one football team for the season.
You mean like most normal sports fans?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And
that
I just want to
seem that odd to me, but okay. Yeah.
So like, I just want to I want to experience it. I want to see what it's like to follow a football team throughout the season. And are you allowed to? Okay, so let's say I'm following let's talk like Detroit Lions here.
Okay, sure.
Am I allowed to follow them? And then let's say they just suck really bad, and am I able to switch over to like the Miami Dolphins because I see what they're doing better? Is that permissible in football
Here's
world?
the thing. I don't think so. I think if you are a true fan, you got to roll with them for the entire season.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't mean that you can't watch other games.
Okay.
But it does mean that you can't say, "Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of this team." No, man. You pick
Okay.
your team.
Can you have like secondary and tertiary teams that you kind of follow?
I think so. I think so.
All right.
Like for me, for college football, I mean, everybody knows I'm a diehard Georgia Bulldogs fan. They just won the SEC championship, by the way. Go Dogs! But because I live here in Tennessee, and my sister went to the University of Tennessee, Jenny's brother went to the University of Tennessee, and we were in Knoxville last year, the day before our marathon, for Jenny's brother doing the flyover.
Yeah.
I'd like to see Tennessee do well. I'm not a Tennessee fan because I'm a Georgia fan.
You don't have ill will against Tennessee.
Yeah, I like to see them do well.
Yeah.
I didn't wear orange in Knoxville on game day. I wore red and black, and I got cussed at as I was pushing my 3-year-old in a stroller. But, it's all good. No big deal. But what I'm saying is you can't just – if Georgia was just having a terrible season this year, I couldn't just be like, well, I'm done and burn all my Georgia stuff. I couldn't do that.
Sure. So I want listeners to help me pick out one NFL team and then one college. Is it SEC? Is that what we're in?
You live in Alabama, so you should know better.
Yeah. So I want to pick out one of each, right?
My wife is dying, by the way, on the couch.
I want to pick out one of each, and I want to follow them. And then let me ask this question: At what point can I begin to refer to these teams in like
as your
first,
team?
as like no, like in the first person? Like I say,
we had a good game.
Yeah, I say like things like our defense was on point.
Man.
Our defense was very successful in this game. Like, when can you say things like that? How far into it can you do that?
So I'm one of those weird guys that says never because, I'm not on the field playing, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But for, people who live vicariously through the 19-year-olds that were chasing the oblong ball up and down the grass field, maybe, I don't know, a couple months in. Here's the thing. Okay. Most SEC fan bases are not snobby. If you start rooting for their team, they're like, come on, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. I like to hear that.
Yeah. As long as you just don't do like a Benedict Arnold and turn your back on their team and start rooting for another team.
See, I'm like a clean slate here. So like, I think any group, any team should be able to welcome me. Like, I have no baggage. You know what I'm
saying? Here's the one key to being received as a legitimate SEC fan, right?
Yeah.
It's not enough to love your team. You also have to hate the team that is your team's rival.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you become an Alabama fan because you're there in Alabama, it's not enough to just say Roll Tide and cheer for Alabama. You have to hate the Auburn Tigers.
Auburn Tigers. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Yeah. Can you remember all that?
I think so. So if I'm a Georgia fan, who do I hate?
Florida.
Really? Okay. Like
Oh,
Florida,
man.
the Florida Gators.
Oh,
Really? Okay.
Oh,
So if I'm a Florida Gators fan, who do I hate?
you hate
Georgia?
a lot of people.
I'm just riddled with hate.
Yeah, probably Georgia. I'd say Georgia or Tennessee.
Yeah.
They hate Tennessee.
Or
Yeah.
maybe you hate Florida because they don't hate you back.
Yeah. No, there's some hate there.
Yeah. Okay.
Both sides.
So I want the
What did you
listeners.
say, Jenny? Jenny's dying about something you just said. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
The fact that I'm having to explain SEC football to you, she thinks is pretty funny.
To a 40-year-old American man living in Alabama.
Well, and you like grew up in the South too. That's why I think it's so funny.
Yeah.
You grew up in Florida, and you should know something about the Florida Gators.
How to play the role of a football fan.
She's saying she thinks it's funny how you process how to play the role of football fan.
Yeah, I want to experience it. Where it goes from there, I don't know. Probably going to drop it after that, but I just want to experience it.
What if a year from now,
Yeah.
you became so obsessed with football that you wanted our podcast to turn into a college football podcast with like a Christian emphasis,
Yeah.
where you were like sharing one verse at the end of the podcast? Man, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, just like Auburn's defense did the other day, man.
Would we
Eagle.
rename the podcast?
I guess we'd have to at that point. Gods and Gridiron.
That's good. That's good. Let me type in Chat GPT. What are some names for a podcast that focuses on the Bible and football?
All right.
Faith and football, gridiron and gospel. Oh, you're close.
Oh, Gridiron and Gospel. That's a good one.
The playbook and the good book.
Oh.
Here's a good one. End zones and eternity.
Oh, my goodness.
The huddle in the word.
Man.
Bible
Praise
in
the
the
Lord.
backfield. Ooh,
Bible in the backfield. Oh.
The kingdom kickoff.
Amens.
Touchdowns and testimonies.
I bet there's probably on Apple iTunes, there's probably one named that. Should I look up to see if there's a podcast named Touchdowns and Testimonies?
Sure. Anyways.
Yeah.
Red Zone Revelations.
Ooh, Red Zone Revelations.
What is a red zone? I don't even know what that is a reference to.
Okay, so the red zone, Gabe,
Oh boy.
is the 20 yards at either end of the football field before you get into the end zone.
Oh, okay.
Do you know what the end zone is?
The end zone is where you make a touchdown, right?
That's where you make a touchdown.
Yeah.
You're good.
touchdown.
See?
Yeah.
You got it, man.
Yeah.
You can do this.
That's where you score a goal.
That's where you score a home run.
A point. A home run.
Right.
Oh, yeah. If the viewers could help me pick a team, one NFL and
Okay.
one SEC
Okay.
team. And here's my goal. I want to go to one game in person for one of those two teams.
Wow.
So, yeah. Is that doable? Can you go to
I
those
think
games?
it is. I'm just amazed by your
Okay.
commitment to this.
Yeah.
That's pretty remarkable.
How much of a financial commitment is? I'm just before I really
we'll talk offline. That's a
okay. Is that a big commitment?
Yeah.
Really? Okay. So to go to like an Auburn football game,
Uh-huh.
really? That's a big
Yeah.
over $100 a ticket?
Oh yeah.
Really? Okay.
Well, it depends on who they're playing, and it depends on where you get your seats,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it depends
Wow.
on how good they are that year, right?
Okay. Well,
Auburn's
maybe
kind of having a down year. They've had a couple. Ever since Gus Malzahn left, they're not having the greatest
Man, y'all. This is
era
an
for
expensive
Auburn
hobby.
football. Yeah. Which is why, for those of us who are men of the cloth, typically just watch on TV, or we get free tickets.
Yeah.
Maybe you can just
Start
those free tickets.
Start a GoFundMe. Yeah.
Well, that has been our episode of Beards About the Podcast. Thank you guys for listening. Send us your questions. Send Gabe some football teams. And, we will see you guys next time.